Okay, in this lesson, we're going to check out how to play a blues in A with a walking bass line. It's going to feel a lot like playing a steady bass blues in A, except there's going to be more going on with the left hand. If you want to download the example that I just played, you can go to the link below or the link on screen, sign up for my newsletter, and download the tab for this lesson and for a lot of other lessons here on the channel as well. So the whole thing about trying to do something where you've got licks on top and then an independent moving bass line on the bottom is trying to make it sound like those two things are two different things that happen to be happening at the same time. So you've got these licks, and you've got this bass line. Now, it makes sense to sort of just go measure by measure and go, okay, I got to put this piece with that piece. Oh, and then I'm pinching here. But I think before you do that, it can really help to back up and just look at the bass line first, like learn that. Look at what the melody's doing, learn the licks. Then when you're putting it together, all of this stuff, the grippy, what finger pinches with the thumb and where, that gets reduced to just the mechanical means to making this musical idea happen. So the first thing I'm going to do is just go through the bass line, because the bass line is basically the rhythm section. It's showing the chord progression, it's outlining the groove, it's the foundation that you're going to put the licks over. So we'll go over the bass line, then we'll look at the licks and try to make sense of those, then we'll talk about how to put it all together. So first, it's a 12-bar blues, and the first 4 bars are A, and we're just playing the same repeating bass line every measure. Now, what finger you need to play that with in the left hand may change depending on what licks are going on top. But for now, we're just using a steady bass. The thumb is playing the 5th string, and we're going open, 4th string, open, 2nd fret, 3rd fret, 4th fret. And so 1, 2, 3, 4, 3rd measure, 4th measure. Now when we get to the 5th measure, to the D chord, things are going to be a little different. We're going to start on a D here on the 4th string, and then go over to F sharp, 2nd fret on the low string. We're putting the 3rd in the bass, so the root and then the 3rd, and then up to an A on the open A string, that's the 5th of the chord, and then a B, that's the 6th of the chord. So that if you were playing, right, it would be like one of those boogie woogie bass lines, but we're inverting it a little bit, so we have this. And then the second time, in the 6th measure, we're going to actually do this climb back up to A. So the D, it gets a little bit more complicated because there's only 2 measures of D and you're doing something different in each measure. So here we have this, and then this. So that's climbing chromatically from the 3rd to the 4th, sharp 4 of D, taking you back into the A. And then, thank goodness, we get back to A, and we're just climbing again for 2 bars. So that takes us through the 2nd line. We get to the E chord at the beginning of the 3rd line, measure 9. We're going to do the same chromatic climb we did in A, we're going to do it on E. Relative to the E chord, we're playing root, 2nd, flat 3rd, and 3rd. Then we get to repeat this D, the one that goes from D leading back up to A. And then home free, we're just going to end up with 2 more measures of A. So the whole bass line played through sounds like this. Now there are a couple things you can do to make the bass line groove a little more. One of them, well, I'm doing palm muting for starters. I've got my palm resting against where the strings join the bridge, so it's a little thumpier as opposed to leaving it wide open. And that helps to get a distinction between the bass and the melody notes. But aside from that, two other things you can do is you can do these little pull-offs off of the bass notes. This is something I learned actually from Emily Remlin, where she was talking about how to comp, and do that sort of in closed position, but it works great in open position too. So open string, obviously you can't pull off from, but after you play this note, there can be a little bit of a quick pull off, and then you don't want to do it on every note. It's one of those a little goes a long way kind of things. So maybe just on the second one, or on the third one, or there it is on the second and the third one. And the whole idea is it kind of implies the sound of when an upright bass player is playing, and there are these little pull-offs and things that happen that kind of help make things swing. So that's one thing. And then the other is that this doesn't necessarily apply when you're trying to put licks on top, but putting in the offbeats on a damped note. So like having your fingers resting on the strings, the left hand, and then getting your index finger on say, the third string. You get a little bit more of the groove. And again, you don't want to do it that overtly, but if you practice playing the bass and the index finger on the offbeats, when you're just doing the bass, a little bit of that sort of offbeat groove may start to creep into your playing when you're playing the single note licks on top with the bass, and that will be a good thing. So you don't need a lot of it, and if I really slowed it down, I don't know if I can still do it slowed down and so put it all in the right place, but it would sound kind of like this if you just, so. And it just starts to put some of those subdivisions in that you don't really hear so much as feel, and it makes it feel like it's grooving harder. The next step is to check out what the licks on top are doing. And one of the best ways to learn those licks and keep them in your head is to break down the solo line by line. So first line, second line, third line of the blues, or the first 4 bars, the middle 4 bars, the last 4 bars. And then inside each line to look at the phrasing, to look at how the licks relate to each other and where they sort of come to a resting point or where they kind of resolve into the next bar, and how they connect in terms of the call and response. And that way you're not just memorizing a bunch of notes, but you're learning a handful of licks and how they all fit together. So we start off. So there's the first line. And we can start to look at this like, well, we're playing a pickup into the downbeat. And really, though, we don't really come to a resting point until we come back to the root. So I would think of this as a delayed resolution, right? You come into the downbeat, and then you don't really resolve until the middle of the bar. And then the next phrase is another resolution. It's a blues lick that comes to a resting point at the beginning of bar 3. So you can hear these as making kind of like 2 statements in a row. And then finally at the end of the line, we have this additional lick, which I would think of as kind of an echo resolution. Like it's a resolution that kind of answers all of that. So now we've got this line that we can divide into 3 moments. And then, and finally, when we get to the second line, we've got this. So now we're on the D chord to begin the line. And you can hear that as notes of how those notes relate to the D chord, which is the fifth and the flat seven and the root of D. But you can also hear them as blues licks, just an A blues lick. The root and the flat third and the fourth of the A blues scale, or the A minor pentatonic scale. So in that sense, it's really one long blues lick that's kind of creating a certain amount of tension over the D chord, waiting to resolve back to A again, back to the root, when we get back to the one chord in measure 7. So you can kind of hear all of this as one long phrase that's kind of arcing towards that resolution point. And then we have another kind of echo resolution at the end of line 2, where we're going from the fifth to the flat 7 to the root of A again. And so this lick, it's pretty repetitive. It's the syncopation that makes it kind of cool. So we'll look at that in more detail when we get the bass line back in. But right now, if I slow it down, and again, you can almost see it as like a set of shorter resolutions. And so we've got two phrases are the same, right? The first phrase and the third phrase. And really the second and the fourth phrase are the same thing, except that the last time you make it a longer phrase so that it resolves and lands on the A again. So. Again, thinking about it in terms of phrases and looking for the similarities and the differences are ways to help remember and hear the licks, as phrases, instead of just notes you're trying to remember. So finally, in the third line, we have I just broke my own rule, right? Because I was playing the lick with my thumb. I really should have kept it to my fingers. So now we've got a longer phrase. And this is resolving, this is an E lick. And so again, we can hear it as notes of the E chord. Root and the 6 and the flat 7 and the 6. Or we can look at it as notes of A, right? So it's the fifth, the major third, and the fourth of A. And so we've got that. And now we're on the D chord again. And then we resolve back to A. So this E lick is another one of those delayed resolutions, right? It doesn't really come to the E, the resting point, until midway through the first measure of that line, through bar 9, right? So 2 and 3 and that's where it resolves. And then over the D, we have another basically A blues lick. To resolve back to A, and then another echo resolution. So that's all of the licks that we're now going to put over the bass line. Now we can put everything together, but as we're putting things together, you want to try to keep in mind that the bass is happening in time and the melody is happening in time. These two horizontal ideas are moving in parallel. And the job in this step is to figure out what are the vertical moves, what are the right-hand things we have to do, and the left-hand things to execute this. But while we're doing that, not to get so tangled up in, oh, I got to make this move and then that move, that we lose track of those two horizontal things. So you still want the melody to have a sense of flow. You want the bass line to feel like it's got a sense of groove. And so that's really the trick, is to preserve all that horizontal momentum even as you're working out like What is the stuff I need to do to make that happen? So we can really just go through blow by blow and see what we need to do, starting with this pickup phrase where it's only the melody. And then we have a pinch. And in general, I'm going to assign, like, just, this is very rough, but like index for the first fret, middle for the second fret, ring for the third fret, and pinky for the fourth fret. And that way, you see there's already an exception, right? But the idea is to keep your fingers out of each other's way by basically using a finger further in this direction, like the pinky, for the higher notes, so that you're then free to reach underneath with a finger that's more in this direction, like your index or your middle finger, or even your ring finger. So now we've kind of run out of room. We got to go with the ring finger here. So the index finger is going to play this note. And doing these two fingers leaves these two fingers free for this grab. And then this is going to, the ring finger is going to slide up, and the index finger is going to come in. This doesn't really matter so much, but if you do the middle finger, now your index finger is free for that bass note. And then you can grab that, and then you're going to an open string on the bottom so you can lose the bass note a little early. And now we're going to use the index finger because we're going into the D now. And here you're going to want to, even though your index finger is here, you're going to need lower notes down here for the bass. So coming into measure 5, we go over here. And you can just hold everything down up here. And I think I used my thumb when I demonstrated it. It actually makes it harder, probably. So either one is fine. But this way you can see it's really just, you know, the thumb is moving around. It's not so much of like a steady bass on one string thing, but it's just a series of grips. Taking advantage of open strings when you can. Now here, again, we've got notes on the third fret on 2 different strings, so it's ring finger and pinky, and then ring finger and index. And this is going to sound pretty dissonant when you slow it down, but once you have it, you know, up to speed, it's going to sound totally normal. And then here we're going to get the index finger in. Again, a little weird sounding when you slow it down. And there may be other finger choices that work as well for you, so you may need to do a little experimenting. Excuse me. And then, now I think actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I think I demonstrated this lick as, but it's actually going down to the root. And then, so as we go into the E chord, again, ring finger, middle finger. And so here we've got pinky and middle finger, which leaves the ring finger free to come over and get the bass. And then you're gonna have to lose a little bit, the bass a little bit early, and then come in with the middle finger here. Or you could do ring finger, but it's a lot of jumping around. So you could move the middle finger over, or you could use the thumb. And then you're walking up again here. And that's basically how all of the pieces fit together. So once you have each line put together this way, you can sort of think of it in 4-bar sections. Then you can slowly bring those 4 bars, each of those 4 bars up to speed and start to connect them up so that you can play through the whole chorus. I think this is actually a really effective way to work on fingerstyle stuff, especially when it starts to get really independent like this, when you've got a bass line moving in one direction and licks moving in another direction. But it'll work for alternating thumb stuff. It'll work for almost any situation where you're trying to get the thumb and the fingers to do something together to create this result. So I teach this a lot in my membership, the Fingerstyle 5. We call it the horizontal 3-step. So first step is isolate the bass, second step is isolate the melody, and then the third step is to, work step by step to put it all back together. And if you want to learn more about that, I'll put a link down below too, so you can check that out. And in the meantime, of course, there's also the link to download the tab for this lesson, and you can check that out as well. So I hope you have fun working on this. I love walking bass lines. It's a really cool way to start to dress up a steady bass blues, and just thinking about how to put different kinds of licks and phrases over a steady bass blues in A is always kind of a fun way to start breaking out of just playing blues in E. So I hope you enjoy working on this, and be sure to check out the tab and all that, and I'll see you next time.